June 2023, Comic Club, Miles Morales, covering Ultimate Comics Spider-Man issues 1 to 5 and part of Ultimate Comics Fallout issue 4. Author Brian Michael Bendis. Brian Michael Bendis, the writer of this Ultimate Comics Spider-Man run, wanted to be the artist on Spider-Man since the age of 6. While Bendis is known as a writer, he started out as an artist doing caricature work for local magazines and newspapers, as well as the occasional bar mitzvah, and it paid well enough to fund his interest writing crime fiction for graphic novels. He started out producing work for Caliber Comics, which primarily publishes independent comics. In 1996, Bendis transitioned to working at Image Comics, where he wrote Spawn spin-offs and the award-winning Powers Comics, a series about a police department devoted to solving superpower-related crimes. Notable for Bendis retaining the ownership rights of the comic, for the comic eventually transitioning to a Marvel imprint and for being adapted into a 2-season TV show on the PlayStation Network. In 2000, Brian Michael Bendis was hired to write the Peter Parker-centric Ultimate Spider-Man comics set in an alternate reality to the main comic Marvel continuity at the time, the Ultimate line of comics targeting a new generation of readers. The idea was to take the initial premise of Spider-Man and apply modern comic book techniques of the time. Sales were in the millions, with Bendis' work apparently surpassing sales of the mainstream The Amazing Spider-Man comic book releasing at the same time. Bendis was teamed with Mark Bagley as penciler, and their partnership lasted for the first 111 issues out of the total 160 issues of Peter's Ultimate Spider-Man comic run. Bendis and Bagley's run on Ultimate Spider-Man set the record for the longest continual run on a Marvel comic series by two people, an honor previously held by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby on Fantastic Four. At the conclusion of the Death of Spider-Man arc, comprising mainly of Ultimate Spider-Man issues 153 to 160, with the miniseries Ultimate Comics Fallout, exploring the fallout of Peter Parker's death at the hands of Green Goblin. The series was rebooted as Ultimate Comics Spider-Man, starring a new holder of the Spider-Man mantle, Miles Morales. In regards to making Miles' Spider-Man a multiracial character, Joe Quesada, who was editor-in-chief at the time, had a conversation about how crazy it would be if Spider-Man really represented the racial diversity of New York City. Over the years that Bendis had been writing Spider-Man, so many people of different ethnicities said to Bendis that because of their ethnicity, their favorite superhero is Spider-Man. From head to toe, Spider-Man could be anyone. So many people fantasized that they could be him. Once, a African-American friend of Bendis's assured Bendis when he was nervous about the pending new Spidey announcement, "When I was a kid, they wouldn't let me be Superman or Batman, but they would let me be Spider-Man." Bendis wrote this entire 2011 Ultimate Comics Spider-Man series, which ran for 28 issues, and the continuation Cataclysm Ultimate Spider-Man miniseries, which ran for 3 issues, the Ultimate Spider-Man issue 200 one-shot, the 2014 Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man series, which ran for 12 issues, and after the merging of the main 616 and the 1610 Ultimate Universe, wrote the 2016 Spider-Man book starring Miles for 28 issues. He also wrote the tie-in Spider-Men 5-issue miniseries and the 2017 sequel Spider-Men 2 miniseries, also 5 issues. While at Marvel, he was not only known for creating Miles Morales, he also created Jessica Jones in the Alias comics and Riri Williams, aka Ironheart. He created the Ronin mantle, first used by Maya Lopez, who later took on the mantle Echo. He created Angela Del Toro, the 4th White Tiger, notably different to the Ava Ayala, the 5th White Tiger, who was in the Ultimate Spider-Man TV cartoon. He created S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Maria Hill. He had the first story with the Ultimate Comics version of Nick Fury, which bore a younger resemblance to the Caucasian 616 main universe Nick Fury, prior to writer Mark Miller and artist Brian Hitch retconning this to make the character black and based on Samuel L. Jackson. Bendis would go on to write the first appearance of Jackson's Nick Fury in the MCU, penning many versions of the Iron Man 1 post-credit scene. His solo character titles at Marvel were generally acclaimed, not just his Miles Morales comics, but the Pulse and Alias comics featuring Jessica Jones, Daredevil Volume 2 issues, Elektra Volume 2, Old Man Logan, and the previously mentioned Iron Man comics, mostly featuring Riri Williams. He wrote iconic comic book events such as the House of M, the second ever Edo comic cast, Secret Invasion, now adapted as a Disney Plus series, Age of Ultron, a title taken for the second Avengers movie, though the comic wasn't even remotely adapted, Siege, and Avengers vs. X-Men. He also wrote more infamous comic book events like Civil War II and Secret War, not to be confused with the plural 1984 Secret Wars series, Secret Wars 2, Secret Wars 3, or the 2015 Jonathan Hickman Secret Wars. He's renowned for team comic books such as Avengers Disassembled, Avengers Volume 4, New Avengers, Dark Avengers, The Mighty Avengers, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. He also did a run on Moon Knight that is Argon's favourite, but was critically panned, and a run on All New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men that I liked, but was similarly critically panned. Since Civil War II, there's been a growing faction of online voices unhappy with Bendis' writing style. While his solo books are generally still well praised, there's been criticism of the way that he writes team books with characters sounding too samey. He's also drawn criticism from the LGBTQIA+ community for his writing of Iceman's coming out story in All New X-Men, but we'll cover that in more detail potentially later this year when we cover the Marvel Infinity Comics Iceman series by Luciano Vecchio. In 2017 and 2018, Bendis transitioned from Marvel to DC, having to work around some serious health complications while putting finishing touches on his Miles run and planning DC books like Naomi, unsure if he'd ever see more than the story outline come to fruition. He was visited in hospital by a number of comic book colleagues, including Matt Fraction, as a name that might be recognized from the Hawkeye comic cast. Bendis recovered and has since written The Legion of Superheroes and Naomi, which were well received, and a number of other books, including Superman, Justice League, and Young Justice, which have been met with mixed reviews before departing DC in 2022. During his time at DC, he started an imprint called Jinx World, under which creator-owned works by Bendis were published. This was part of his exclusive clause in his contract. This included his Powers comics, which migrated from being published through Marvel to being published through DC instead. In 2023, Bendis is doing work with Dark Horse, currently working on a series called Murder Inc. Jagger Rose, and since 2021 has been writing new Powers comics, his Jinx World imprint having migrated from DC to now Dark Horse. Back in his time at Marvel, he was a consulting producer on the first season of Jessica Jones and an executive producer on the remaining seasons, and also a member of the Marvel Creative Committee, which controversially had input on the first two phases of the MCU. The Marvel Creative Committee largely became redundant and was dissolved when Feige successfully reorganized the structure at Marvel Studios, so he no longer reported to Marvel Entertainment CEOs like Perlmutter, a problematic figure who got in the way of not just the movies but also toy merch and was the reason why Black Widow toys were few and far between, and instead reported to Disney studio chief Alan Horn. During its time, the Marvel Creative Committee purportedly put forward suggestions such as removing the 70s music soundtrack from the first Guardians movie and having the heroes fight super soldiers instead of a Captain America and Iron Man face-off at the end of Civil War. The committee's interference reportedly led to multiple directors leaving projects, including Edgar Wright from Ant-Man. He also wrote the original script for the cancelled 2011 video game The Avengers, the movie, loosely based on the film, but heavily featuring a Skrull storyline, being produced by developer THQ for the Xbox 360 / PlayStation 3 / PC and Wii U. The game was cancelled due to THQ filing for bankruptcy in 2012 after years of financial struggles, and nobody else was willing to fork up the cash to continue producing the game. Bendis was also a consultant on the first Miles Morales Spider-Verse movie. The penciler for the issues we're covering today was Sara Pichelli. Sara Pichelli began her career in animation, working as a storyboard artist, animator, and character designer. She said of this work, "It wasn't really for me. I felt like a tiny cog in a machine." She started doing work in the comic book industry after meeting comics artist David Messina. Prior to that, she was not particularly interested in comics and preferred animated movies and anime. She worked as a layout assistant for Messina on titles such as IDW's Star Trek comics. In 2008, she submitted her work to the Chester Quest International Talent Search and was named one of the finalists by Marvel Comics editor C.B. Cebulski, which led to her working for Marvel. She illustrates for Marvel from her home in Rome. Prior to penciling various Miles Morales comics, Pichelli worked on X-Men, Pixie Strikes Back. During the 2010s, she also did art for some of Dan Slott's Fantastic Four run. Pichelli is currently one of the in-book artists on the Scarlet Witch comic, a recent Russell Dauterman cover whose name you'll recognize from the Jane Foster Thor comic cast, showed Scarlet Witch potentially romancing Loki. Moving on to plot. Plot summary for issue 1. Norman Osborn, in a secret meeting, admits to Dr. Marcus that he created Spider-Man and charged Dr. Marcus with recreating the procedure, and if any of this information were to go public, Norman would beat the scientist to death with his bare hands. Dr. Marcus is overwhelmed and does not realize that the spider the two men had been studying, the 42nd test subject, is free from its container. Sometime later, Osborn Industries is shut down following the revelation that Osborn turned himself into a monster known as the Green Goblin. A very different looking Green Goblin from the one in the 616 universe with a mask, a purple and green costume, a glider, and pumpkin bombs, for the record. The Prowler, a tech-savvy burglar, robs the abandoned Osborn Industries facility, and Spider-42 stows away in the loot bag. In Brooklyn, New York, a young Miles Morales attends an event with his parents where a handful of randomly selected children will be chosen to attend the prestigious Brooklyn Visions Academy. After sitting through a lottery for admission to the school, Miles is the last one selected. His parents are thrilled, but Miles feels bad for all the children who were not selected. Worth noting that Ball 42 and Spider 42 is likely a Hitchhiker's reference where the number 42 is the meaning of life. Miles visits his Uncle Aaron later without his parents' knowledge. Miles tells his uncle that he was accepted to the school. When Aaron offers to help any way he can, Miles says his parents would never allow it, since they don't even like it when the boy visits his uncle. Miles passes out after the spider crawls out of the robbery bag and bites him. Miles' father bursts into the apartment and demands to know what Aaron has done to his son. The two argue about Miles. Miles runs away and Miles' dad races to the street but cannot find Miles due to Miles' shocking new ability that he can turn transparent. Plot summary for issue 2. Miles starts displaying other spider abilities, immediately reveals his powers to Ganke, who immediately gets extra points for wearing a Frogman shirt. Ganke and Miles suspect Miles is a mutant, which is complicated as mutants have done damage to New York City in this universe that rendered them persona non grata. His father knows Miles well enough that Miles has to run to Ganke's house and picks him up. He tells Miles that Uncle Aaron is a thief, that both of them have been to jail for stealing. Miles' dad grew past that phase of his life, but Uncle Aaron didn't, which is why he doesn't want Miles hanging around Aaron. Miles' dad tells Miles that Miles can say anything to him, and then mutants fly by. Miles' dad spouts anti-mutant sentiments, and Miles says nothing about his new powers. The issue ends with Ganke's research, proving that Miles may not be a mutant, but the spider bite may have made him Spider-Man. Plot summary of issue 3. Miles and Ganke discuss the difference between getting mutant abilities and spider powers. Miles just wants to be normal. Ganke and Miles head to Uncle Aaron's to try and figure things out, but Uncle Aaron is out. They encounter a building on fire, and Miles saves 2 people from the burning building before leaping away. Miles has a panic attack and vows to let the other Spider-Man do all the superhero stuff, and he'll just live a normal life. We flash forward to orientation day at Brooklyn Visions Academy, where Miles, Ganke, and a new character, Judge, are roommates in the on-campus dorms. Miles has a nightmare that Electro attacks him and wakes up to an emergency drill. Congregated in the Academy's gymnasium, they hear a report that Spider-Man has been shot. In this issue, Miles is seen reading All the President's Men, a 1974 non-fiction book by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward about the Watergate scandal that brought down the presidency of Richard Nixon. Issue 4. Miles sneaks out to see if Spider-Man is alive. He arrives to see an unmasked Peter Parker Spider-Man finish off the Green Goblin, but in the process, Green Goblin explodes into a giant fireball. Peter is too exhausted to escape. Peter dies, surrounded by Aunt May, Mary Jane, and Gwen Stacy. His final words about how he couldn't save Uncle Ben, but he could save Aunt May. Peter's death lights the fire in Miles, that if maybe Miles had embraced his powers sooner, he could have been the extra something that turned the tide sooner in that battle. Miles attends the public funeral of Peter Parker, whose Spider-Man identity has been blown. From behind the barricades, he asks Gwen why Peter became Spider-Man. She responds with Uncle Ben's iconic mantra, with great power, and Miles follows up, asking why Peter wore a mask. Gwen responds, because he didn't need anyone to know who he was to be a hero, and it looked bleeping cool. We fast forward to Miles doing some early designs of his spider suit and tries on Gunky's old Halloween Spider-Man costume and goes out web swinging on the town. This is where, if you have the collected edition, they slot in some pages from Ultimate Fallout issue 4, where Miles tries to stop the kangaroo from a destructive bar fight, barely defeating the kangaroo. The city is aware of a copycat Spider-Man, and Miles has experienced spider sense, but hasn't figured out what it is yet. The issue ends with a kick to the head from a peeved Spider-Woman. Issue 5. Miles and Spider-Woman fight, and Miles accidentally knocks himself out. Miles wakes up on the Triskelion, surrounded by multiple Avengers. Nick Fury has a one-on-one with Miles, filling him in on his uncle being the Prowler. Electro wakes up after a medical mishap and goes on a rampage, taking out the Avengers, leaving Miles in a one-on-one with Electro. Miles distracts Electro long enough for Nick Fury to finish the fight. Miles tells Gunky about how Miles was approached by Spider-Woman in civilian attire. She gives Miles his new, now iconic, Spider-Man suit and says his actions with Electro means Nick Fury is willing to give Miles one chance.